Welcome again for the second talk for the day by Benejure Drubral, who is a senior scientist at the CNRS and presently the director of Les Housh Physics School. She received her PhD in astrophysics in 1990 under the supervision of J.P. Jahn. She is a specialist of turbulence and its application to astro and geophysical flows using theoretical, numerical, or experimental approaches. He is the fellow of APS and the member of the French Academy of Sciences. We are very happy to have you here. You may please begin your talk.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So the work I'm presenting has been done over the years, so it involves a lot of people, some experimentalists for the team Bang, and also some PhD student or some postdoc, and you see their name over this first slide. And so I thank Shamridi for the very nice introduction to turbulence, and I will follow up with first speaking about breaking of Kolmogorov universality. And what I mean with this is that if you take any turbulent flow, say the ocean, and you plot the energy per wave number as a function of the wave number, then you all know that you observe a straight, a power law, k to the minus 5/3. But what is seldom stressed, and which is a feature of what I call Kolmogorov universality, is that if you plot the same energy spectrum divided by epsilon to the 2/3, where epsilon is the energy input into your turbulence flow, times eta to the 5/3, where eta is the smallest, is the dissipative scale in your flow. So both of these quantity epsilon and eta depends on what kind of flow you consider, whether it's water, air, whether it is ocean, whether it is flow in your cup of coffee. And so if you plot this non-dimensional spectrum as a function of k times eta, where again eta is the smallest, is the dissipative scale in your flow, then you have a universality insofar as every energy spectrum that you take in a lot of different flows, they all collapse onto a same universal curve. So at the top, what I show with blue triangle is energy spectrum in the ocean, so very big flow in water, which is forced by wind, let's say, or some sort of energy imbalance or salty water. And at the top, I compare this with the energy spectrum drawn from numerical simulation of Navier-Stokes equation. And at the bottom, I compare also the same thing using experiment. And you see that everything collapses on the same curve. So this is what I call universality, because it allows you to put all measurements done in a lot of different turbulent flow on the same plot. And the reason for this comes from Kolmogorov theory, and it's why it works is because it's a direct consequence of Navier-Stokes equation. If you consider Navier-Stokes equation and you consider a homogeneous flow, then you are able to derive something which is called the Karman-Howard-Monin equation, which is just a sort of global energy balance in your flow. So it contains here in this equation, E is the total energy, epsilon is the energy injection, as I said. And I have introduced a quantity delta U, which is just velocity difference over a distance L. And so you see the way to get Kolmogorov spectrum is to balance epsilon, which is the second term, with the third term, which comes directly from the nonlinear term of Navier-Stokes. So if you balance these two terms, saying that your turbulence is stationary, so you neglect the first one and you neglect the first two, the last two terms, because you say that they correspond to very small or very large scale, then you get that delta U scales like epsilon to the L 1/3, which gives you directly the Kolmogorov spectrum, and which gives you these universality things. And if you balance the middle term, which the energy dissipation, this gives you an expression of the dissipative scale, because it is the scale at which the nonlinear term because of the order of the dissipative term, and it gives you the expression of eta, which I was looking for, nu cube over epsilon over 1/4. And so just looking at this equation, you have everything you need, everything to understand K41 theory and to understand universality. Problem with this is that this universality appears to be broken when you consider more refined quantity. And in particular, the reasoning I just showed you, it tends to show you that velocity increment over a distance L should scale like L to the 1/3, a magic exponent 1/3. And so if you take moment of delta U, like delta U to the P, and you take moment of this, average of this is called the structure function of order L. If you follow just this simple reasoning, a naive argument would be that this structure function should go like L to the P over 3. In fact, these have been measured. So at the top, you see two kinds of measurement, and look at the one at the top right. This is a measurement of the different structure function performed in 1 hour experiment. Different colors code different moments. So the black one at the bottom is P equal 1, and at the top one you have P equal 9, I think, or 8. And so you see it is in log scale, so they behave like power law, but if you measure the corresponding power law, these are the red dot on the bottom. Do you see my things? These are the red dot here. And you see that they don't follow the line n over 3, but there is some sort of curvature. And this means that K41 is broken at some point. Another way to see that there is a breaking of Kolmogorov universality, in fact, is to have a closer look at the superposition of all curve I was showing you, and especially look at the bottom curve here, because these are DNS done with spectral methods, so very precise. And what you see is that even though the superposition is very good for large scale, when you go at scales that are smaller than the dissipative scale, then you start to see some change, and you see that the curve do not superpose exactly. And the explanation for this was given in a very nice paper by Paladin and Vulpiani in 1995, is that they showed, well, or they discussed that this could be a signature of the fact that, in fact, this energy balance that Kolmogorov was using is a global energy balance. But if you look locally, there could be a similar kind of energy balance between energy and dissipation. But if you look locally, you're not obliged to have this exponent 1/3. And you could have more generally this kind of balance with quite a general exponent, NEH, which is not necessarily equal to 1H, to 1/3. And if you apply the same kind of balance between the dissipative term and the nonlinear term, then you observe that if this is true, then you introduce a sort of a dissipative length scale for each of these exponents, which scales like viscosity to the -1 over 1 plus h. And this dissipative length, in fact, corresponds to a kind of regularization length for the delta U, because you see that delta U, L to the h, is a very singular field, because if you try to compute the derivative of such kind of things, if you do delta U over L and L tends to 0, this gives you that gradient vanishes. So in fact, when there is viscosity, it prevents this singularity. And so the picture put forward by Paladin and Vulpiani was that, in fact, turbulence should be a sort of collection of a lot of different scaling power laws, local power laws, with a local exponent h, each being regularized at a different scale, which depends on the exponent. And so this explains, the lack of superposition here. It is a manifestation that, in fact, there are several dissipative range, depending on which singularities you are exploring, depending on the Reynolds number. And so that's why in the dissipative range, all these curves do not superpose. In fact, this picture is also reminiscent of something that Shamridi just spoke about, the Onsager conjecture, is that if this is true, if in fact what is important is to look locally at the energy budget of turbulence locally, what is going on. So this was done, for example, by Duchamp and Robert in this paper, in this famous paper on nonlinearity 2000. Then you can show that if you assume that there are indeed such little localized singularities, then the full energy budget is this equation that is given on the first line. And in this term, there is a new term that appears, d of u, which is just the limit as L tends to 0 of something that scales like L to the 3h minus 1. And this term is given here. You see it is a gradient of some function times delta u to the cube. This is where the 3h minus 1 comes from. And so the interesting thing is that in general, when you compute an energy, a local energy budget of any flow, you assume that the flow is regular. Okay, and if the flow is regular, h, you can show that necessarily velocity increments, it's a Taylor expansion go like L, so h is equal to 1. And so d of u being the limit as L tends to 0 of L 3h minus 1, it's L squared. So d of u tends to 0. So for regular flow, this term drops out, and then you find the regular energy budget that you find in any book. If you want to have a local energy budget for a fluid, you will always find this budget, but without the term d of u. But if what Paladin and Vulpiani says is true, and there are some local singularities that scale like L to the h, then for a certain type of singularities, if they are strong enough, then these terms could have a non-zero limit. And especially this was Onsager who did the math and computed. And you can easily see it from this expression. You easily see that if h is greater than 1/3, so it's a weak singularity in some sense, then d of u is always bounded by a term that goes to 0, so it produces no additional dissipation. But if h is less or equal to 1/3, then this term can be finite. And so you can have, for very strong singularities, a production of dissipation that is due to the singularity. So this is a new feature that Onsager was aware about. But the very nice thing about this is that if you look at the expression of what is this d of u, it's a limit as L tends to 0 of this term here. And you see that there is absolutely no viscosity involved in this term. You know, it's just a gradient of some test function times difference of velocity to the cube. So you produce, if you have a strong enough singularity, you produce an energy dissipation that is independent on viscosity. So this is exactly what Lars Onsager says in 1949. And this seems to correspond to what we observe in turbulent flow. If you plot the total energy dissipation, so the sum, presumably of this term plus this term, you see that as a function of Reynolds, after a certain Reynolds, it tends to saturate to a value that is independent on viscosity. And when I say it tends to saturate, I really mean it. These are measurements that were done in our lab in many experiments. And the last point here, I put it here, but it's really a point that was measured in superfluid experiment where the viscosity is equal strictly to 0. Okay. So altogether, this picture seems to be very nice and explain a lot of things. But then the question is, well, if this is true, we should somehow be able to measure or say something about this singularity. Is there a way we can do that? And this is where multifractal theory comes into play. And the idea of the multifractal theory, which was first put forward by Giorgio Parisi and Uriel Frisch, it was to assume, as I told you, that the local velocity increment, u1x plus L, locally scales like L to the h of x. Okay, so there could be some local scaling. And this over a fractal set of coordination C of h. So this was first the original theory of Parisi and Fritsch, but it was later shown to be equivalent to a much more exact theory using large deviation. And in the language of large deviation theory, in fact, we can frame it exactly by saying that we assume that the probability of log of delta u, this scaling experiment, to be equal to h log of L, okay, goes in the limit when L tends to 0 to exponential log of L over L C of H. So this frame like this is exactly a large deviation property. If you do a little math, you see that this means that the probability that delta U is equal to L to the H goes like L to the C of H. Okay, it's exactly the same idea than Parisi and Fritsch, but stated mathematically. Okay, so when you have said that, what does it mean? It means that all the information about your scaling exponent and their probability is encoded in this large deviation function of H in this quantity C of H. So the question is, okay, I'm happy to know that, but how do I measure this C of H? So this is where it's becoming interesting, because in fact, you can show that there is a very deep connection between this function C of H and the scaling exponent zeta of P that I just introduced earlier, that were introduced sort of heuristically to try to test the self-similarity of turbulence. And in fact, you can show that mathematically there is a Legendre transform connection between zeta p and C of H. And it takes this shape. Zeta p is just the minimum over H of pH plus C of H. And in fact, there is a very nice graphical construction associated with this. You know, if you are someone, you just measure your zeta p. How do I compute C of H using my measurement? Well, this formula, this Legendre transform, means that you take one order, let's say 8. Okay, so you have this point. At this point, you draw the tangent to your curve, to the curve of your scaling exponent. Okay, the slope gives you H. Okay, H at this order, and the intercept of the slope gives you C of H. Okay, so by just playing with slope, then you can measure your C of H. So if you have zeta p, then you have C of H, and if you have C of H, you have zeta p. Both are equivalent. Okay. What is nice is that now if we come back to Navier-Stokes equation and to my turbulence, is that all the turbulent laws now can also be equivalent expressed with zeta p or with C of H. For example, so the Kolmogorov law saying that scaling that the third moment of the increment of velocity cube goes like L, then it can be expressed like just saying that C of H is less or equal to 1 minus 3 of H. Okay, this gives you this condition. Okay, zeta 3 is equal to 1 is equivalent to this. And moreover, if you look at the mean energy dissipation, if you say that average of epsilon goes like Reynolds to the minus Xi, and in our case it will be Xi is equal to 1, then you can show that necessarily Xi is a mean over H of this complicated exponent. But if you look at which condition it gives you, then it gives you again the condition C of H is greater than 1 minus 3H. So if you lose the two most important laws of turbulence, namely Kolmogorov theory or anomaly dissipation, it gives you the same condition than whatever you do, your multifractal spectrum must lie over the line of equation 1 minus 3 of H. Okay. Can we say more? In fact, Navier-Stokes equations are very complicated, so we may say, okay, there must be a way to have more information regarding C of H. And indeed, in a recent work with John Gibbon in 2022, we showed that using Gibbon's theorem for weak solution of Navier-Stokes on a torus, which just gives you some bound of the gradient of velocity as a function of Reynolds number. you can see that this theorem transforms onto this graph, this final graph. In fact, so there is a first, this is C as a function of H. So the first constraint that the probability, that goes like L to the C of H must be normalized, give you that necessarily C of H must lie over this line, C of H is equal to 0. The four-fifths law and the energy dissipation gives you that C of H must be in this part of the semi-plane, bounded by this line. And the theorem 1, this theorem, further gives you that H necessarily is greater than minus 2/3. So using all information we have about Navier-Stokes, we know that whatever we do, C of H that we measure in our experiment must lie in this semi-plane here, bounded by all these lines. Okay. So this is both a strong and not a too strong constraint, but here, just to show you, I plot you a few of some proposition for C of H that have been lying in the literature. So, for example, the log Poisson law, it's a dotted line here. You see it respects these things. And the log normal law of K. Kolmogorov 62, if you know about it, it also respects the condition and it's likely, provided we don't cross this line. Okay. So this shows you already that log normal law for if you want to apply use this, it is necessarily an approximation because you cannot allow this line to go beyond this line here, which comes from Navier-Stokes. Anyway, so this is theory. How do measurement respect this theory? So here I show you in green and in yellow here, these are all measurements that are done. So on the right, these are measurements that have been done in our experiment. So both for longitudinal velocity increment and this one for transverse. And here on the left, these are measurements that have been further done in numerical simulation of our experiment. And the dotted line are just log normal fit, fit with a parabola. In fact, they respect this condition. And what you see is that what is measured currently, so these are the point, is that we have a whole range of possible value of H from the measurement. And we have anything between H, between 0 and 1. Okay, and even not even 1, it seems that if you look at this, the highest we are able to measure is close to 2/3. Okay. Okay, so these are measurements, and if you, I just want to comment further, is that you see that H equal 1/3 lies here along the red line. And in fact, it makes you a separation between exponents that correspond to non-dissipative singularities. Into this, H is larger than 1/3. So these singularities, if they exist, they are not strong enough to dissipate energy. So they will not contribute to energy dissipation. While all the singularity here, they are very interesting because they contribute possibly to a non-viscous way to dissipate energy. Okay, so now the question is that can we observe these singularities? And in fact, what I remind you is that here, remind you that when H was less than 1/3, the eta H, that is the regularizing scale of a dissipation corresponding to a Hölder exponent H, is less than Kolmogorov value, the dissipative value. So we can divide our world, turbulent world, into two kinds of world. Before I had the energy spectrum. Here I have the value where the scale is equal to the dissipative. So if you look left from here, you have the Kolmogorov world, where all singularities survive and where you see the Kolmogorov spectrum. But if you go beyond this scale here, then you start to probe length scales that are smaller than any of the regularizing scale for h equal 1/3. So if you go beyond this scale, it means that you will be able, if you were able to enter this one, to observe dissipative singularities and to look at how they look like. And so, but going beyond the Kolmogorov scale is a challenge, both for DNS and for numerics. So what I'm going to do in the second part of this talk is to try to do that, to try to probe this dissipative world using some very special numerical simulation and some dedicated experiment. So in the end, I will be able to show you how a dissipative singularity looks like and what we can say about it. So first, let's start by a numerical approach. Yes?
Sorry. Is it okay if I just ask you one question quickly?
Yes.
Yeah. So in the previous slide, for your dissipative world, you're still at length scales, small, but still at length scales where hydrodynamics is valid.
Yes.
You are assuming that.
Yes.
So no thermal, nothing. Okay.
No.
Okay, thanks.
No thermal effect.
So it will be slightly lower than Kolmogorov, the conventional, but still you're not there's no breakdown of hydrodynamics. You don't need to go below.
Yes. I'm still using Navier-Stokes. Okay.
Okay.
Navier-Stokes is still valid.
Thank you.
Okay, so how can I track those singularities numerically? So numerically, if you want to do that, because these dissipative singularities that can live at very, very small scale, you run into problem if you do the usual numerical simulation, like the one shown by Shamridi. Because if you sample, for example, your equation on a regular Fourier grid, then necessarily you have a cutoff. And what you will observe if you run a numerical simulation, for example, with no viscosity, so this was shown by Shamridi, is at first the energy spectrum develops, and then after sometimes the energy reaches the larger scale, the smaller scale, the larger wave number, and then from now on, energy accumulates onto the cutoff wave number. And then you end up into a thermalized scale, so a thermalized state, so you don't see anything. So what was suggested a few years ago by Campolina and Meilibaev in 2018 was that, okay, it's difficulty to observe singularities because we cannot go to very small scale. And so why don't we, instead of projecting the equation of motion onto a Fourier grid, why don't we project them onto a log grid? That is, instead of having a wave number that is linear in spacing, it will become exponential in the spacing. So this is a kind of idea that is used in what is called shell model, Shamridi spoke about. But this is here, it's in 3D, and it's just a regular Fourier projection, but onto a log grid, rather than on a log lattice simulation. And the beauty of that is that Campolina and Meilibaev have shown that it's a good convolution, it's a good projection with a lot of good properties, provided the spacing takes some certain value. It's a discrete set, but infinite set of values that are able to realize this. And in all what I follow, we take the value of lambda that corresponds, so that the projection onto a log lattice is a real projection. And because it's a real projection, the equation of fluid projected on this log lattice conserve all the symmetries and the conservation laws of Navier-Stokes. Okay. So from now on, I'm considering this, and you see already the beauty of this is that if I consider now my energy spectrum as a function of time, here you see different time, different color correspond to this different value of lambda. That is just to show you that it's independent of this. Here is the maximum wave number that you can have by DNS, and here you see that you are able to reach a very high value of K, very, very small scale, with a very few modes. All the simulation I will show were run on a PC. No big computer. And you see clearly that if you run an equation, a fluid equation without fluid, then you clearly see that the spectrum develops and go to smaller and smaller scale, following a kind of same similar scenario. Moreover, what you show is that you can show that this thing corresponds to the formation of a finite time singularity, because now if you plot 1 over the maximum value of the gradient in your simulation as a function of 1 over minus t over tb, you see clearly that you have a power law. In fact, it's a very simple power law. So the maximum gradient blows up in finite time like 1 over tb minus t. And so it corresponds to the formation of a finite time singularity. So this was what Campolina and Maillibaev did in 2018. But we investigate this a little bit further to understand, okay, it blows up in finite time, but what kind of singularity does it correspond to? And the nice thing is that, in fact, it corresponds to a scenario that was proposed by Frisch and Morf in 1981. Is that it corresponds to a case where you have a singularity in complex plane that tends in finite time towards the real axis. So let me explain you a little bit what it is. Imagine that your velocity, you can extend it analytically into the complex plane. And so it goes like z minus z star minus I delta, where delta is its complex part. And it goes to some exponent alpha, where alpha is less than 1. Okay. So this clearly represents, if delta is equal to 0, it represents, really my Hölder velocity. This will become non-differentiable. You will have an infinite derivative when delta is equal to 0. But if delta is, as long as delta is positive, if you take Fourier transform and compute energy spectrum, then you will see that your energy spectrum has a power law, which depends on the value of the scaling exponent alpha, but it also has an exponential cutoff, and the typical scale of which is given by delta. So if you just take your energy spectrum, you see that it's indeed a power law with some exponential cutoff. You compute value of the cutoff, and you plot it as a function of time. And this is what we did. And what you do is that delta, which represents the distance of the complex singularity to the real axis, it goes to 0 in finite time with the power 2.85. Okay. So on log lattice, we have singularities in complex plane, and they go to a real axis in finite time. Okay, so what about the exponent? Well, I have a first exponent, which is the exponent corresponding to the blow up, this law here, and it gives you k to the minus 237. So if you compute the exponent, the corresponding h, it corresponds to an h which is close to 2/3. Okay. So it's we had a whole range of exponents between 0 and 1. Here we have 1. Okay. Where are the others? We still have only 1. The first thing you can notice is that you say, okay, I have a blow up in finite time, but what is becoming after the blow up? Okay, is there something strange appearing? So to be able to investigate this, then we need to do some sort of a regularization of the flow to be able to go past the blow up. So we did it using some stochastic scheme. It's not very important, but in fact, after the blow up, what you can show is that your energy spectrum, it saturates onto another power law, which is less steep. It goes to minus 2.37 to k to the minus 52. So here, this corresponds to h equal 2/3, here to h equals 0.25. Okay, so you have gone from an exponent that was larger than Kolmogorov to an exponent that is smaller than Kolmogorov. So you have two types of singularities. Because this exponent is lower than Kolmogorov, then you might expect that something is happening in the energy dissipation. From what I was telling you, is that as soon as the scaling exponent becomes smaller than 1/3, then you should be able to dissipate energy. And this is indeed what you see. Here you see the behavior of the total energy in the flow as a function of time. You see that pre-blow up, where the exponent is larger than 2/3, you have no dissipation of energy. And after blow up, you see that suddenly energy is dissipated. Okay. And here you see more clearly, you see dissipation of energy as a function of h. You see that as long as H is greater than 1/3, you don't see any energy dissipation. And as soon as spectrum becomes steeper than k to the -5/3, then you see a dissipation of energy. Okay, so in some sense, you have after blow-up, you have convergency to a dissipative solution. So we have two exponents from this study of Euler. We have 2/3 and 0.25. We ask ourselves the question, are there more exponents? So I'm not going to enter into a lot of detail, but yes, you can find more detail playing with Euler and Navier-Stokes. And if you want details, they are in this paper that was just published. And in fact, in the end, this is summarized here. This is the exponent we find. And you see that we find a whole range of exponents. These are lots of different simulations. So here, this corresponds to non-dissipative solution. Exponent is still greater than 1/3. They all correspond to blow-up in finite time. And after blow-up, then you have regularization, and they give you a lot of range of exponent h between 0 and 1/3. And here you have a post-blow-up dissipative solution. So using this simple simulation, we say that in fact there is room to create a lot of different singularities. For non-dissipative solution, it corresponds to solutions that blow up in finite time, which are non-dissipative, and then after blow up they become dissipative, and they have a lower exponent. So the question, all these were sorts of kind of inviscid simulation where viscosity was not done. And you can tell me, okay, but real fluid have viscosity. So how are these singularities affected by viscosity? So for this, we also run Navier-Stokes equation on log lattice. And what you observe is that when there is viscosity, then you have no blow-up. Okay. The maximum gradient, now it goes like 1/nu of beta, and beta is of the order of 0.39. Okay. The spectrum has a slope correspond to h equals 0.4. And if you look at the distance, the distance to the real axis, then it is non-zero, but it decays like the viscosity to the power 0.65. Okay. So what we observe is that indeed viscosity regularizes all these singularities, but in the inviscid limit, then you can have a blow-up of vorticity. And what is interesting is that even in this Navier-Stokes equation on log lattice, you can compute. Here is the dissipation as a function of viscosity, and you see that as viscosity goes to 0, you sort of tend to a constant in energy dissipation. Even so, you don't have exactly a singularity. All right, so this was on log lattice. I cannot show you anything on Euler on real DNS because of this thermalization effect, but I can at least check a few things that we obtain on Navier-Stokes. And for Navier-Stokes, here is a picture. I think Shamridi already showed it as a dissipation as a function of Reynolds. You see that clearly you have something which sort of tells you that there is a kind of dissipation anomaly like we observe in log lattice. But more interesting is that using very high resolution numerical simulation, you can play the same game and compute how the distance to the real axis scale with viscosity. And this is what you find. And this corresponds to a power law nu to the 0.6, which is very close to the exponent we find using log lattice. Okay, so this is not a proof that what I have said, tell you before is true, but it gives some flesh to the fact that maybe in Navier-Stokes there is a way to create all these different scaling exponents via blow-up or blow-up regularized by viscosity, etc. Okay, so now I want to continue, and up to now I was not able to show you any picture of these singularities, and of course what we would like to know is what do they correspond too. You know, what is the physical mechanism that in real Navier-Stokes or in Euler gives you this singularity? So it's impossible to track the singularities one by one, but what we can do at least is that we can use this idea of dissipative singularities by noting that this quantity, d of u, which is the limit as a function of L of this quantity, gradient of delta u cube, this in fact is a kind of indicator of singularities, because as I told you, this scales like L to the 3h minus 1. And so it is easy to see that if I compute this term in red and I decrease the scale, if I see that this term, when I decrease the scale, tends to 0, then this tells me that locally at this position, there is no dissipative singularity, because in fact, if not, this term should not tend to 0. And in opposite, if I see that this term keeps a non-zero value, then I know that at this position, I have a candidate for a dissipative singularity. So to make you understand what it corresponds, let's take a look at Burgers. If you have a Burgers equation, you say that after a certain time it develops a shock, and if you put viscosity, it is regularized by viscosity. And so here it's very easy to compute d of u, d as a function, the dissipation due to singularity as a function of scale. So when it's blue, it's 0. When it is yellow, it's high value. And you see that in that case, this is a scale, this is x, and you see that singularity is in 0. And when I compute d as a function of scale, you see that it makes you a sort of finger that points you exactly at the location where is the singularity. And in that case, it's a singularity that corresponds to h equals 0. So it's a dissipative singularity. And on the other hand, if now I put some viscosity, then you still have creation of a finger that points to a point. But of course, after a scale that is small enough, these fingers vanish because this corresponds to a singularity that has been regularized by viscosity. So we just do the same thing with our velocity field. It is a kind of example of what we get. You know, we still have this kind of fingers that point towards some definite region. And so all we did in the sequel was just to use this to take all our velocity field, compute this quantity, decrease the scale, and look at location where the finger were pointed at. And we did statistics of this. And so here is an example of the kind of structure that we found at this location. So we found very clearly Burgers vortices or velocity sheets. You know, if you look every time we were seeing a kind of singularities, we were either seeing Burgers or vorticity sheet. But when we had a closer look dynamically at this event, then what we observe is this kind of thing is that each time it would correspond to an interaction and in fact a reconnection of vortices. So these dissipative singularities that we found in our experiment were all linked with interaction of vortices and reconnection. Okay, so this is the picture you have to see. What are the singularities in Navier-Stokes? They correspond to reconnection. So you may ask me, but how are you sure that you capture the dissipative singularities like this? Well, we can play a little game, you know. If you compute structure function on all our vorticity, our velocity field, we obtain, you know, the exponents that curve out of the straight line of Kolmogorov. But you can say if this region where the local energy dissipation is very high, where the dissipation induced by singularity is not going to 0, we could exclude them from our sample. And if we do that, normally we remove all this, and so we should find Kolmogorov. We should find that Kolmogorov is true again. This is what I did. What we did here. We computed the velocity structure function condition to the location where you have no energy dissipation due to singularity. What is very interesting is that it still follows straight line, but if you compute the scaling exponent, you see that they follow exactly on the Kolmogorov picture. Okay. So this really shows that these singularities that we have evidence correspond to, they are responsible for the intermittency. If I have just 5 more minutes, you could tell me, okay, but now you have
Yes.
yeah, 5 more minutes. Okay.
No worries. Take the 10 minutes.
I want, I'm physicist, and so I'm very interested about universality, and so I showed that these singularities with different exponent h, they are responsible for destroying of Kolmogorov universality, but now that we understand how they work, is there a way that we can recover the universality? And for the energy spectrum, this was done in this very nice paper by Vargas, Sola, and Fritsch in EPL. They showed that, in fact, you could invent a clever way to rescale your axes in order to have everything collapse. And this clever way corresponds to the fact, is taking into account the fact that there are different singularities. So in fact, it amounts to correct the wave number with some exponent beta, where beta depends on the Reynolds number. And in fact, Castin, a little bit later, also found the same kind of trick for the structure function. So here is the structure function that you obtain in Kolmogorov description. It shows that you have no universality, and if you use the same data and you just correct with this exponent, which depends on beta, then you see that they all follow on a universal line, which only depends on the order of the structure function. And this exponent, which in fact correspond to a kind of a temperature of a turbulent flow, or the number of degrees of freedom, then it scales logarithmically with the Reynolds number. Okay. And you can show also, this is shown in my paper, or this is discussed in the paper of Genèse, that it is linked with extensivity of free energy associated to the multifractal description. There is a kind of thermodynamic analogy. But all I want to say, what I'm showing you, is that now the multifractal approach is very mature. We understand its link with statistical physics, and we can even use it to recover universality that was lost due to the existence of several scaling exponents. So this is about all. I have shown you that there are two worlds in turbulence. There is a Kolmogorov world where everything can be described just with a single exponent. You have k minus 5/3, etc. And here it's kind of scale invariant. I show you that there is no intermittency in this world if you remove, if you stay here. And but beyond the Kolmogorov scale, there are these singularities that are stronger than Kolmogorov singularities that can be generated by blow-up and correspond to post-blow-up solution. And they are responsible for the intermittency and for the dissipation anomaly. And they correspond to the multifractal world. And just to finish, in fact, this world is very interesting because I discussed about singularities, but there are all sorts of questions which belong to statistical physics in this world. There is a question of spontaneous stochasticity, which maybe you have heard of during this session. There is a question of thermal effects, so Shamridi asked me about. And in fact, because now we have the way to explore this world with our experiment and with our simulation, then this is all work in progress. And I'm hoping that in the next few years, we will have an answer regarding this kind of phenomena that I have no time to speak about. Okay, I thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer your question.
Thank you very much. This was actually quite enlightening talk. For questions, please raise your hand. I'll call out your name in the order they appear on my screen.
So there is one, Kasanov, he wants to ask question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your interesting talk. And I would like to interesting for me. What kind of program you use it to describe the pictures?
What kind of program? I'm
Yeah.
using MATLAB.
MATLAB. So, what kind of method you use it to obtain the solution of the Navier-Stokes equations or numerical method? Did you use it, numerical method?
Yeah, I use numerical method. We use spectral methods, and we use spectral methods associated with Runge-Konta time integrator of order 4 or 5.
Mhm. Thank you.
Standard equation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I have one small curiosity. Uh, so so you had there was blow up, and post blow up, it was dissipative.
Yes.
So one practical question: since you had a blow up, how were you able to measure the dissipation? Uh, So this would be a practical question. And secondly, do we know the mechanism of this dissipation in the absence of viscosity?
Okay, so how are we able to measure things after the blow up and to measure dissipation is because we had a small regularization, stochastic regularization. In fact, we had a noise at very small scale, and all our measurement makes sense because we conduct a series of simulation with amplitude of the stochastic regularization going to 0 while location of the stochastic regularization goes to a smaller and smaller scale. So we do a double limit.
I see.
K max tends to infinity and amplitude of stochastic noise goes to 0. And so we observe that it converges in this limit. So that's why we can say mathematically sound things. And second question, what was second question?
Do we know the mechanism
Yeah,
of
because
dissipation?
mechanism of anomalous dissipation is due to, in fact, in Navier-Stokes, we have a nonlinear term, and this nonlinear terms makes you have a sort of cascade of energy towards smaller scale. And so, in fact, what is the anomalous dissipation mechanism is that it's just a way to transfer energy from the larger scale to the scale equal to 0 in finite time. So
So
in fact,
that's
it
this
removes.
picture of cascade. That's the
Yeah,
picture of cascade.
it's a picture of cascade, but a cascade that extends down to 0. Okay, so so then you suck energy to 0 scale. So of course, physically, you cannot reach a scale equal to 0. So what in fact is happening when you reach very small scale, then you start to see thermal effect and compressibility, and so then you create a kind of micro shock wave, and then energy goes into sound waves. Okay. So
Okay.
physical mechanism is that you take energy, you put it to very, very small scale where
Yeah.
compressibility plays a role, and then it is dissipated into sound wave. And you see that there is no viscosity into this.
Okay. So instead of heat, we have a sound wave.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. It was actually quite enlightening. Uh, so this was also experimentally verified. You mentioned it
No.
in
The going
superfluids.
to sound wave, not yet. We are thinking about how can we measure it, and we have some ideas, but we didn't do it yet.
Okay. But there was this superfluid experiment,
In
right?
superfluid experiment, in superfluid experiment, in fact, there is another way to dissipate this energy through not sound waves. I mean, sound waves is a way, but it's
Mhm,
correspond to the normal component of the fluid. In superfluid, then you also have the quantized vortices. And then you
mhm,
can dissipate. What is happening is that you drive a lot of energy into these quantum vortices, and then
mhm.
you see that singularity corresponds to interaction of this vortex. And when they interact, then they start to develop Kelvin waves. Kelvin
Mhm.
waves correspond to oscillation. And so then you dissipate energy into Kelvin waves in superfluid if temperature is low enough.
Okay. Can I make this statement irrespective of how the energy is being dissipated, whether it can be viscosity by heat or it can be shock wave or quantum, whatever is the physical mechanism? The the theorem for less than 1/3, which predicts dissipation, is correct irrespective of the mechanism.
Yes.
Okay, so this would be a verification for the Onsanger's theorem.
Yeah.
Is there are there like more people who have done this verification, or or no? Because I've not seen this much.
Numerically, well, let me see. I'm not sure.
That's fine. That's fine.
There are many people that measure, dissipation numerically, and they see that it tends to a constant or not, and it depends on boundary condition. It depends on many things. These things is not quite settled, but experimentally, I think we are the only one who have been conducted experiment from all the range of Reynolds number to the superfluid. I don't know any other experiment that has done this.
Yeah, perfect. Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Very few people talk about in the experimental and computational people about Onsanger's theorem. So I had a feeling that there were not many anyway.
Yeah. But there is a recent GFM perspective by Eyink where he discussed all this.
Okay.
So if you're interesting, you should look at this recent GFM perspective by Greg Eyink.
Okay.
He does quite a nice review of the literature. So
I see. I'll look into it. I'm acquainted with some of his work, so
okay.
it will be easy for me to find him.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any more questions or comments? You can unmute your mic. Probably no. I guess so. This is a good point to close this talk in here. Thanks, Professor Rubel, for the nice talk. It was actually very nice and enlightening.
Okay, so it was a pleasure, and thank you for the invitation.
It was a pleasure for us as well.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye.